But yeah, but so the students pretty much, have an idea of who you are. So, I mean, if you want to, we can launch right into the questions.
Sure, let's do it.
Have time. Okay. So there are no particular order, but I mean, the first thing I would like for you to do is just to tell us a little bit about yourself. What you would like us to know about KJ.
So right now I'm a writer of novels. I have written one novel, which was quite successful. I worked hard and I got lucky. I have a rule with my friends that we're not allowed to say that we got lucky unless we also acknowledge that if you don't work hard, there is no luck if you don't work hard. So that's our rule. I did work hard, and I wrote a good book, and then it got attention that books don't always get, and that's not something you can control. So that's what I do now. That book was The Chicken Sisters, and I'm sure that you've show. Yes. But here it is.
Yes.
And it was a Reese Witherspoon pick, which makes it a New York Times bookseller. And I am eternally grateful for that. I have another book coming out this summer. It's called In Her Boots, and I don't have a copy of it because it doesn't exist yet. Okay. And then I'm working on another one. I'm already trying to work on the next one. And I can talk about sort of that process of working on them and selling them traditionally, or I have a friends that do it independently, which is also another way to have a really successful career as a writer of fiction. Before that, which I think is what we were probably really going to talk about, I was a journalist. I started as a freelance. Well, I started as a lawyer. So I went to law school and I worked in law firms, and I didn't like it. I had a lot of jobs. I kept quitting. Didn't suit me. And so I started freelancing for magazines, which at that point were still, they're still print, but there were a lot more of them. Right. And this was just as places were starting to go online. So I was able to get a foot in the door. There was, sort of the opening of things changing. I worked for Slate, which was a big, and it still is, it's still a pretty decently sized media site. And I went from Slate to the New York Times, where I did a little bit of freelancing. I wrote some essays just the same way you did for me when I was the editor of Motherlode. I wrote essays for the prior editor, and when I found out she was leaving, I went balls out for her job. And I knocked people out of the way, and I did everything. I was probably a little underhanded in various ways. Don't care.
It's
Sometimes
the truth.
you have to do that. And I just went straight to them. I was like, you have to hire me. I'm going to be the best. I'm going to kill this. And it happened that the prior editor left very suddenly, and I was lucky enough to know that. So what actually happened, I don't know that they would have hired me based on my resume, but I was right there the minute the other person left, and the Times was left with a hole. Okay. So they had this space on the internet that was expected to have daily content and no one to fill it. And I had said, hey, I'm the best person for this. Here's the stuff I've done. You got to hire me. And the editor called me and said, look, I'm not hiring you, but could you do it for a week? And I was like, yep. Okay. I called up the people at Slate. I was like, sorry, you're just going to have to deal with this.
The New York Times.
And exactly. You say yes, whatever they say jump, you say hi, how high. And I said, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'll have you something tomorrow. I'm on it. And then it took her, the next week, she was like, okay, I kind of still need someone. And I think I did it for 3 weeks. And then she found, then she decided she would audition other people. So someone in-house did it for a week, and then they came back to me. And then someone else did it for a week, and then they came back to me, and they took some time, and then they gave me the job. So, and all that time I was just, I was killing it. I was doing everything I could. And when the other people wrote, I would be like, wow, that was really great. Mine was better. not in so many words, but I would just be sure to be like, really enjoyed the such and such today.
Right.
I don't remember exactly how, but I made sure that editor was never not thinking about me.
Right. Because you knew it was your moment, right? So that was it. And obviously
I didn't mention that before that I had applied for other jobs at the Times, and didn't get them. So, it's easy to leave failure out of these things, but I applied to be the children's book editor at the Book Review. And I got an interview, and I went into the office, and he literally basically laughed me out of it.
Oh.
I mean, I got the interview, and then it just, it was partly because I wasn't willing to move to the city. And I had thought I had made that clear because at the time I already lived in New Hampshire. So that's really why he laughed at me. It wasn't because my resume was, it was pretty good for doing that. I was writing about children's media at Slate, as well as about family and societal relationships between family and government, which was my specialty at the times. So I was qualified, but I wouldn't move to New York. Anyway, and I had applied for other, truth is I applied for something else at Slate before I got that job too, so.
Well, no, I mean, it's always good to speak to, like you said, the failure, or if it's even failure, right? Not getting those things that we want before the thing we get that we want, or we think, we want, right? Because
if you're not playing, you don't ever get anything.
And this is true, but you know, that's also that was another question, but you kind of answered it already. So were you in-house at the times, or were you always working remotely?
I always worked remotely. I was lucky enough that the editor who ran this, so this is 2013 or 2012, and the editor who ran my section, which even the Times called a blog then, now they wouldn't, also ran Nate Silver's blog. I don't know if you knew it. It was that huge elections blog. And he worked outside the office. So that had sort of set a precedent for me, even though my predecessor had been in the office. So she was willing to take a chance on it. I honestly took less money, I think, than they would have had to pay someone in-house. That probably made a difference. I kind of regretted that later, but I don't know if I'd have gotten a job if I hadn't agreed to a lower salary. So yeah, so I worked from home, but it was a full-time job that I did from here. I mean, I was expected to be available. It was great because, you know, you could kind of be like, yeah, I'm totally working, and you know, you weren't, but no one could really tell as long as you had a laptop. You could be anywhere as long as the stuff got done. So I definitely worked more than full-time hours, but not always between, which was fine with them.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, not every editor at the Times at that moment would have accepted that. For example, the book review editor wasn't interested in that. I could have done that job that way, but he wasn't willing. He didn't even want to hear it. The current editor probably would be fine with it.
Right.
Yeah. And who knows? I mean, she's leaving. She's about to get replaced. Who knows? That person inherently won't be in the office as much. Right. Because now we are all different. Right. So, you know, you got to keep pitching it if you want things to be different.
Well, and I think that's interesting because you touched on this, because it's kind of similar. I mean, I work for a college, so most of my job pre-COVID was on campus, right? Or one of the campuses. But before COVID, I was already on Zoom. I was on Skype. I was on, I forget the other platform I used to use, but I was already kind of doing the video thing with students. Only one person in a larger program, so I can only be in one place at a time. So I just think it was interesting. Once COVID hit, it was like, I felt like, okay, well, everybody's kind of coming into my world. Like I've kind of been here already. So I wonder if you kind of feel that way too, in that you were doing this before this was the thing to do.
Absolutely. I mean, I was working with, I had 5 different editors during my time at the Times. I worked with them all remotely. I went in about once a month. And I would go in, I had a desk, and I would go in, and once I went in and my desk was gone because they had like renovated the office. I was like, and I never left very much there. Right. Finally, it took me, I had to sort of wander around and go, okay, my desk used to be here.
Where am I supposed to sit?
Does anybody know where the books I had were?
Right.
Yeah, it was very bizarre. And I was fairly unique at the Times at that point. Most people worked in the office, and I worked with copy editors who were with, and just every time when I did go in, I made a real point of like, I didn't work on the days I was in the office. All I did basically was drink coffee with people or stand over people's jobs and desks and chat with them to make sure that because I don't know how people do that now. I hope that they come up with sort of ways like, let's have a little Zoom, just the 2 of us and stuff, because you need you need to anchor yourself in
Yes.
that world, especially when you're the person at the meeting who's coming in by Zoom. If everybody
Right.
else is present,
That's
you
true.
really need to make those connections and have people be on your side. Especially in a place like the Times, and I would imagine universities are the same, where they lay people off constantly and everything is in constant flux. So.
Right. No, that's very true. And I'm glad you said that. And that's what we're all trying to do, right? Trying to figure out how we're gonna, be personable, but yet be in front of those screens and whatnot, and still kind of have that connection, which I think for the most part, we found a happy medium, at least on our campus. I try to anyway. But, one thing that I wanted to ask, one of the students wanted to know, and this is always a very common question, is just how did you get your start? So you mentioned that you were at Slate prior. How did you get your start initially in media? Like,
okay, so like I said, I went to law school and I had jobs. I had 7 jobs in 7 years. Yeah, I'm not super, actually, I'm a really employable, and people will hire me because I'm really good at interviewing, but I'm not always that great at, and I will do the job. Whatever I said I would do, I will do, but if I don't like it, I don't stick around very well. So I don't necessarily play well with others. So I had 7 jobs in 7 years. And then
that's a book. You know that, right?
7 jobs in 7 years.
That's a book.
They weren't that interesting, but maybe. And we moved here, and I made an agreement with my partner, my husband, that I was going to be a writer, and I was going to get some kind of a job. But we live in a small town in rural New Hampshire, and now that's easier, but this was 18 years ago. So it definitely took some doing, but we had an agreement before we moved that we would hire babysitters and to have the kind of care for our, at the time, 1 kid, but eventually 4, that we would have if I had a full-time job while I figured out how to find a job. Because otherwise, as a woman, it's very easy to accidentally find yourself at home with those kids. And that didn't suit me. So I wasn't going to do that. So, but more to the point of how did I get the job at Slate? It's very bizarre. I met a woman named Susan Straub. Her husband is Peter Straub. He's a rather well-known horror writer. Her daughter is Emma Straub, who owns a bookstore in Brooklyn and is also a well-known writer.
I know that name. I know that name.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, so Susan had been in a magazine that I admired because she had a program in which she helped parents learn how to read to their kids. And she was focused on teaching parents whose, a lot of her students were parents who were incarcerated or who had partners who were incarcerated or who otherwise just weren't in a position, hadn't been read to themselves as kids. So she had this program of encouraging and teaching and giving out books and things like that. And I thought that was amazing. And I had a baby at the time. So I forget how, but I reached out to her and we hit it off. And I was going to volunteer for her program and maybe sort of be a part of it. And that was maybe a job I was going to have. This was while I was still in New York, right before we moved. And then we decided to move. And about the same time, Susan and I decided to try to write a book together. Weirdly, it is in some ways easier to sell a book on a topic if one of you is an expert, which she was, than it is to sell articles to magazines. So we sold a book, especially nonfiction. We sold a book for no money. We made $6,000. I mean, we still make like $30 a month on this book. So we agreed to write this book for $6,000. I don't know where it is. I've definitely got copies of it. It was called Reading with Babies, Toddlers, and Twos. And so we're writing this book. And I basically used the fact that I was writing this book and we got an agent and she managed to sell it. So then I would contact magazines and newspapers and I would say, hey, I'm an expert because I'm writing this book. I'm not an expert, but I was going to write this book with an expert. So I would be an expert pretty soon, let me write for your publication on this. And they would basically ignore me. And then I would figure out what kinds of articles they had that I could possibly have written.
Right.
And I would write them again and be like, remember that article you had last month on such and such? I could do that only about this different thing. And they would ignore me. And I would keep a chart. And about the fourth or fifth time, I sent them a thing that really was a thing that they would publish. Like I really paid attention. As an editor later, people frequently would say, let me put it this way. Somebody submitted something to me for the Motherload blog last week. The Motherload blog hasn't existed since 2018, and I haven't worked there since 2018.
They're not paying
That's
attention.
how little attention that person.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that they came to me instead isn't so bad, but the fact that they didn't know it didn't even exist anymore, you don't do that.
Yeah.
That's just, and they were super embarrassed. But so you send the place that you want to write for something that they could reasonably publish that is the right length, that has the right tone, that is about a thing that they cover, that is in the voice that they use. If they don't ever publish anything in first person, you don't send them something in first person.
Right.
So I did all of that. And after about the fourth or fifth time, the editor would respond. And usually they might say something like, well, no, that's a terrible idea. Plus, I'm not paying you to write 2,000 words, but could I have 200 words on the baby foods of different nations? And I would be like, yep, sure. Whatever you want, my friend.
Right.
And if somebody was like, can I have 200 words on microphones? Yep. Yes, you can. When do you want it by?
Mm-hmm.
And then, if they came back to you and was like, well, we thought we wanted to write about microphones, but we've been thinking about it and cameras would be more interesting. So for the same amount of money, will you change everything that you wrote to cameras? And you're just like, yep, I certainly will. Absolutely, sir. May I have another? And some of the reason that I could do this should be said that I had a partner who had a steady job. So I could spend the couple of years it took to get to the point where I was making the kind of money that I could have lived off of.
Right.
And it did. It probably took me 3 years to be doing that. And so had I not had the partner, had I also had to have this kid and also a day job, this would have been harder. It would have taken longer. So that's something that I was fortunate to have, because it was probably, it was longer than 3 years before I could have supported them in the style to which I would like to support.
Right.
But I could have, we could have eaten and had a roof after 3 years, but I don't know how it would have taken longer without that. If I'd also had to, and it would be hard because you'd need
but,
a mother or somebody else to take care of them.
Right.
The secret is don't have kids, but that isn't great advice for anyone who already does.
Right. And nobody's going to listen to you or me because we both have 4. But I'm glad that you said that, though, because a lot of times, when you're pursuing certain, I don't even know, just about anything now, you kind of need that support, right? You need someone else that may or may not be able to hold things down on their own, as you're out pursuing and saying yes to all of these things that may or may not be paying you.
Right. Or you need to figure out what job you can do that comes with sufficient health insurance that does give you either the time or the energy you have to do the other thing. And then you have to give up Netflix or anything else until you get the thing that you want to do creatively to the point where it can sustain you physically. That's difficult in the United States because we don't have the kinds of supports that they may offer in other countries.
Right. No, and you're absolutely right. I get that question a lot. People ask me, Sharisse, why aren't you writing like you were? Why aren't you publishing like you were? And I said, well, before I was a stay-at-home mom, I was a military spouse. Yes, I still had a lot of responsibilities, my kids, all that, but I didn't have the level of responsibility I do now as someone who's divorced, working full time and freelancing. So it's definitely changed my ability to put out content, but so I'm glad that you spoke to that.
Well, and I think people who don't do the writing or don't do the freelancing really underestimate the amount of time that it takes. I've told you that I write books now, and I am definitely aware that the world at large has this illusion that I am somehow writing those books in my free time. Like, I don't know what else they think I'm doing, but I get a lot of, well, how do you have time to write books? I'm like, because that's my job.
That's my job,
and someone pays me. So every day I get up in the morning and I go sit down and I do something towards producing another book. It's not always putting words down because that's not how books work, but Because if I don't do that, then there won't be a book. And if there isn't a book, no one will ever pay me.
Right.
So it's very funny, the conversations that you end up having with people where they're just like, oh, when do you find the time?
Yeah, no, they're again,
I don't know. When do you find the time to go to your office and be a doctor?
They're not clued in because they don't know, like, this is your job now, right? Like you said, this is your job now.
Yeah.
But
and that's easier for me because having the Times as a full-time job and doing it from home, I'm used to it. Because I also get a lot of, well, how do you make yourself do that instead of spending the whole day either cleaning out the pantry or eating everything in the pantry, both of which are totally viable options. And the answer is, well, I'm used to, I learned that skill. I have that skill. I've spent enough years with people breathing down my neck, wanting the content, that the fact that there's nobody breathing down my neck now besides me doesn't matter.
Okay. But no, I like that. I mean, I really like that. And I love having these kind of conversations, KJ, because you know what ends up happening, at least when you're speaking with professionals, is all of the questions that come from the students somehow end up getting answered without me asking the question. Comes out of the natural conversation. So I absolutely love that. But I did want to ask you something specific to podcasting, because you have your podcast. And so one of the students, I think, that either has a podcast or is interested in being a podcaster, wanted to know, how do you pick your topics, and how do you know what's going to be, I guess, the most interesting or the most engaging to your listeners with regard to your podcast?
So when I first wanted to start a podcast, I spent a lot of time figuring out what I would want to continue to podcast about beyond 10 episodes. Most podcasts die between 10 and 20 episodes because people lose interest. So and that can be acceptable. Like, you can make a podcast and you can be like, I'm going to do a 10 episode podcast on this, and that's all it's going to be. And so that's a different kind of thing. But we wanted to make a podcast that would keep going for a long time. And at the time, my co-host Jessica Leahy and I both wrote about parenting. And the obvious thing to do would have been to make a podcast about parenting. And in fact, people encouraged us to do that. But I, in particular, was aware that I wasn't going to be writing about parenting, not only not forever, but probably not for very much longer at that point. That is a topic that was going to have an end of, I will never not be interested in the catastrophic way in which our country fails to support families. That's different. But I didn't want to do like sort of a parenting advice kind of podcast. And the topic that we came up with that we would both be forever interested in was writing. And it was perfect for us because now she still writes about parenting. I have almost completely stopped. We have a third co-host who is also a novelist who writes both romance and publishes it independently with extraordinary success. She's a more than 10-time USA Today USA Today best-selling author who publishes her books independently. So that's a thing that your students might be interested in. But anyway, so our podcast is about writing. So that's the overarching topic. And then within that, I think we are very focused on people like your students, people who are, we try to speak both to people who are already in the game, who are professional writers like we are, but we also try to focus really hard on the fact that very few people are full-time professional writers. Most people have another job. We're the three of us are. And none of us started out. Well, I guess I was, but I was a full-time professional writer with a job at, I had the Times gig when we started this. And Jess was a teacher and a writer when we started out. And our co-host was moving from stay-at-home mom to full-time writer. And she actually wasn't our co-host at the time. Anyway, so how do we think of topics that, like, within that are interesting? We try not to have anyone on the show that we're not excited to talk to. And we try to have a topic that is going to be of interest both to people who are trying to find their way into a writing career and to people that are already in it. But the most important thing, I think, is that we try to have a topic. It's very interesting to say something like, not that we've ever had Stephen King as a guest, because we haven't. We've had David Sedaris. It's very interesting to say, David Sedaris, man, that'd be cool. Let's talk to him. And then not sort of think of anything beyond that.
Right.
That isn't going to work very well. And in
Right.
fact, it's probably true of our interview at David Sedaris, because we might have just fallen over and fangirled. So we didn't do that, handle that very well. But no matter who you have, it's really important to have decided, all right, I would like to have this person on. So for example, we had someone on recently because she had talked specifically about how she strategizes with her agent to choose a kind of book that they think they can sell. A lot of writers, a lot of times you'll listen to a writer of fiction, and especially the more literary writers, and they'll say, oh, you should never write anything that you don't love. You have to write the thing that comes from your heart. You have to write the thing that you're passionate about, the thing that you really care about. And I get that, but there are a lot of people who are just like, no, I just want to write something that other people will read. And that doesn't mean they're not passionate about it. It doesn't mean they're not interested. So for example, this woman had written a fantastic rom-com that takes place at a Comic-Con and is a costume, I've just forgotten the word, but people who dress up like their favorite characters.
I know what you're talking about. Yes.
And I've just blitzed on the word. It's a thing. And so she set a rom-com in a imaginary reality TV competition for people who create costumes for Comic-Con.
Okay.
Because she loves all of that.
Okay.
But just because she loves all of that, she also wanted to strategize about what books do people, what would people want to read around that?
Right.
So maybe writing a romantic comedy wasn't necessarily, she likes them, she reads them. And my point is that she really thought about what would the market be interested in within this context, and strategize with her agent. So that was a really interesting conversation. We could have talked to her about a lot. Her name is Sharisse Glass, incidentally. And the book I think is called The Love Con.
Okay.
But I specifically had her on to talk about how she made a decision to write that book as opposed to, she could write a how to make costumes at Comic-Con book. She could have written, a literary book in the second person about, the experience of going to a Comic-Con as a woman of color. She could have done a lot of different things with that, but she chose this because she thought, she could do it well and she would like it and she could sell it, and all of those things were true. So that was an interesting topic.
And I love that though, because like even when I was in my MFA program, there'll be like a handful of us that, like you said, we'll have this project. It's a passion project. It's something we really want to put out, but is it ever going to sell? Will it ever see the light of day? Will it ever be on a shelf? maybe not, right? And then have this, okay, well, this is kind of where the market is going. Maybe I can kind of write something in that direction, because ultimately I want to sell a book. I'm not writing things to say in my laptop, right? So I love that kind of, that kind of balance of, this is something that's of interest to her, but yet she really is looking at what might sell and what people might be interested in. So I love that.
So we thought that would be really interesting. Or we might have somebody on and say, okay, you used to write, you went from being a journalist and writing nonfiction to writing thrillers. What was that transition like? What did you have to change about your writing? Or, we might have someone on to specifically talk about, you're really good at interviewing people. You write books with people, nonfiction books where you talk about the intimate details of other people's lives. How do you get them to tell you those things? And how do you write about them in a way that, like, I would be really scared to write something so deeply personal about, say, you, that you would be upset with how I had done it. How do you do? So, we might have someone on to ask that. So my point, I think, is that we really try to pick a thing that person is really good at, that is also something other people want to do.
Right.
So we try to marry that question of, what's this person going to be good at talking about? What are we interested in, with what people in our audience want to hear? And we do pay attention to which shows are more popular, and that kind of thing. And we look at what other shows are doing. And so I think, sort of from a podcast general perspective, finding that narrow thing that is both something you're interested in and something that there's an audience for is key. And this is true of books and of all writing. Nothing's for everyone. we all
Right.
have a tendency to be like, oh, everybody's going to love my podcast. It'll be just like This American Life. Everybody's going to be interested. And truly not everyone is interested in This American Life, but
Right.
everyone will be interested in. And you should, if you make something for everyone, you're probably making it for no one. A better thing to do would be something like, I am deeply fascinated by the beers of Texas. And I'm going to have beer makers come and talk to me about how challenging it is to make beer in Texas, where the laws are this, or the climate is that, or whatever. And you'll find your people who are also interested in that. But you can't get too, like, I think you probably can't focus on the worm in the tequila bottle.
Right. Right.
Although actually maybe you could. That might work, but you do need it to be narrow. You need to find a niche.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, and we've talked about that a little bit, but yes, definitely. So listen to this question. I know you've been asked this a million times, but my students don't know. What does it feel like to have a best-selling? What does it feel like? Take us through, like, all of the feels for that. Or when
it feels really good.
Okay.
It feels really, let me tell you though, that I also have this book. And this book didn't sell nearly as well as the publisher expected it to. My best friend and co-host, Jess Leahy, I don't see her book here, although it has to be here. She has a parenting book that is a massive bestseller, hundreds of thousands of copies, New York Times bestseller list for weeks. And the publisher of this book hoped that I too would achieve that. That didn't happen. So I also have, and that book I talked about earlier, the one that's about reading with babies and toddlers and twos, God knows that is not a New York Times bestseller.
So you're speaking to balance, right?
I just want to say, like, yeah, but this, I mean, it feels amazing. It's totally a dream come true. I was just saying earlier that the truth is that we always raise the bar on ourselves, and it's like, well, that one was a bestseller. Can I do it again? Probably not, but maybe. Can I do even better? But no, it feels amazing. It was a surprise. The reality of it is that once Reese Witherspoon picked it as her book club pick, then we hit an interesting spot, because it hadn't been published yet, where if it hadn't made the New York Times bestseller list, that would have in itself been a failure, because almost all the books that she picks do, but not all of them. So then I had to work, like, before that, I wasn't even thinking about getting, I mean, sure, did I have it in the back? Like, oh, wouldn't that be cool? But it really wasn't on my radar. And being picked by Reese Witherspoon was also not on my radar. And I had no control over that, incidentally. That's just it doesn't happen unless you write the book, but there's nothing you can do to make it happen. So we had these weeks where I was in this strange position of, oh my God, I know she picked it. And I actually, because I'm insane and because we do this to ourselves, I looked. And like, of the last, 20 books that she'd picked, the club was a little newer then, so maybe there had only been 20. Maybe 16 had made the list and 4 hadn't. And then I was just like, oh my God, if I don't make the list, that's going to be worse. It's just going to be humiliating. So
I don't think I even knew that Reese Witherspoon had a book club until your book was in her book club, because I follow you on social media. I think that's kind of how I learned about it. But I thought, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Like, it just seemed like a good fit.
Oh, it was amazing. And it was a good, it is a good fit. I know she liked it, obviously. That was exciting. She picks a really wide variety of books, and it's clearly her. Like, it's not she has a team of people I know now because I've been a part of it, but it's clearly her. I mean, you can definitely imagine them going, really, this one? And she's like, yep, this one. So, which is cool. And she's picked everything from a book about having fair play and equality in the work within a marriage, which was called Fair Play, a book of short stories by a Haitian author, nonfiction, fiction like mine, thrillers, everything. She's all over it. Her only requirement is that it has to be by a woman and about women. So
I like it.
That's been really interesting. But anyway, if it felt really good and I am still really proud of it. And I will, it's a little bit like having written for the New York Times or having worked for the New York Times. Once you've done it, you always have it.
Yes.
Like 20 books from now, if I never hit the New York Times bestselling list again,
Yep.
and I still manage to sell 20 more books, the publisher will put New York Times bestselling author on the bottom of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
I
Nobody can ever take it away from me.
Nobody can take it away. Yeah.
And I love that. I mean, and I love that. So, but I'm just curious though, because I don't know if I knew this about you, that you were a lawyer before. So do you think that your writing comes from, because I know a lot of times when students want to pursue law, we'll tell them sometimes major in English, right? Because there's going to be a lot of writing or whatever, or history or whatever. But I mean, did you foresee before you were a lawyer at any point during that time writing in the way?
It's really the other way around for me.
Okay.
I was always a writer, and because
Okay.
I was a writer and a good writer and loves to write, but because I didn't grow up in a place or a family that saw creative professions as viable, I was encouraged to be a lawyer.
Okay.
I didn't know anyone who was a writer or an artist of any kind and considered that a viable way to make a living.
Okay.
My parents were the first people in their families to go to college. My mother went to college while I was a kid. So doing something practical was uber important in my family, and it would not have been acceptable. I think it would have been barely borderline acceptable to be the kind of journalist that is a reporter and gets that kind of job. But because I did try that, but I didn't like it. So it seemed more practical from my point of view to be a lawyer and then write on the side. I don't know that was the best, but it worked out, obviously.
No, yeah, definitely did. I was
fine.
just curious. Okay, so you were really a creative first, and then the
truth is that I always wanted to be a writer, and I was actually a columnist for my college newspaper the entire time I was in college. And I will now horrify you by saying, I think I made more money doing that in college than I did in my first 2 years of freelancing.
Oh no.
And I probably I forget, I was trying to remember the other day what they paid us. It might have been 10 cents a word. And they were like 800. Well, that doesn't seem like enough. Maybe it was 20 cents a word. I mean, I would make $300 or $400 for a single column. And I wrote a column every week.
That was pretty good.
It was especially for a college student. I put myself through college, so I had another job too. But I mean, that was real money. I also had a massive scholarship, so it all worked out. But yeah, that was real cash. I think it took me a long time to make that kind of money again.
I'm thinking like that sounds pretty good to me.
I think it was 10 cents. I think it was 10 cents a word, so I might make $80 a column. But then I would write 4 of them a month. So that would end up being a check for vaguely $350. And of course, my tax obligations were pretty minimal then. So, I mean, that was real money. A lot.
No, that was good money in college. It was steady. I mean, and it was something you love. So, I mean, yeah.
And I did it for 3.5 years. I started doing it, halfway through my freshman year, and it was great. So,
I mean, I don't know. For me personally, this is just so entertaining, and it's just so awesome because I mean, the way I had originally came to know you, and then, kind of watching on social media and kind of listening and stuff like that, you kind of get a sense for a person. But I mean, you are your own movie, all of these different aspects. I mean, it's just, you've really done a lot. You've really done a lot. And I think sometimes, as when we're trying to become, the next whatever, and we'll see like your name and, New York Times, we get this persona in our head, of who people might be. And
I think that's a really important point for your students. Yeah. And it is something that I used to do, especially when I first wanted to shift into writing. I would find someone that I admired, and then I would go ways back as far as I could in their career and try to figure out what the first things they did were. So, I admired Anna Quinlan greatly. She was a columnist at the New York Times before I got there. And, she started out writing these tiny little freelance pieces for magazines. And so I took multiple writers and went and sort of dug as deep as I could and tried to figure out where they started. And I actually, I would write it down and figure out, well, what's the first thing? Because, you can't just go straight to the Times.
No, right.
so what's the first place that that person wrote? What's the first thing that person did? What's something similar that I can do that might put me on that path? Because you got to figure out where people start. And that can be why, as when we look at our podcast, we don't always choose to talk to the most successful writers, because it's not necessarily that useful. It can be interesting, and we'll do it if there's something we want to talk about. But finding out. I mean, I adore Stephen King, and his book on writing is amazing. But the way he got started is a path that doesn't exist anymore. And truly, the way I got started is a path that barely exists anymore.
Right.
So that's hard. You have to sort of find your own way to it. But yeah. So looking at somebody, it's actually probably better to look at somebody who's maybe 2 steps ahead of you and figure out, well, what was their first step? What was their first job that they did, and how did they move from there?
No, I love that, especially because, I mean, well, now everybody is doing kind of like everything, you know what I mean? You just have to do multiple jobs just to survive now, depending on where you are. So, I mean, I really do like that, because it can be intimidating if someone is, really, really successful, if they're like at that, level where you just think, my gosh, that's my dream. I want to be there. And they're not really willing to kind of go back and speak to their obstacles and speak to adversity, and, when they were waiting tables or bussing tables or cooking, whatever, right? That is very helpful.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is, I write all day. Like, now that's what I do. And I know that's the dream. I sit down, and I podcast, and I do emails, and I do social media, but this is my full-time job, but it definitely didn't start out that way.
Right.
I mean,
and like you said, now, I mean, and you have 4 kids, and I mean, you're just, you have a partner, and how do you manage all of it? I mean, even just with the way that this interview started, you had to take your, you know what I mean? Like,
we have house guests. Yeah.
Right. Your day is just, maybe glamorous, to some, and maybe to others, like, wow, she's kind of like us, she's still juggling family. You have, people in your home, just all of that. I know you love horses. I know that,
Yeah. We have, we have some farm responsibilities going and stuff like that. I mean, well, the answer is in part that I've been doing it for a long time. I'm old. My kids are old. I got a son in college, so he's not a lot of trouble, right? And I have another one who's going to college next year. Then I have 2 younger ones. They'll both be able to drive by next year. So they're pretty independent. They go to school all day, and I write all day, and then we make dinner. So now this is not when they were 4 and 4 and 4 and 8 and 4 and 4 and 6 and 8, then I had a babysitter all the time, and I was scrambling to pay her. And when she didn't show up, I was, putting on TV shows so that they would shut up so that I could finish an interview, or invariably they would get sick. Oh my God. I was in New York, probably spending one of my days at the New York Times, when my babysitter, who was pregnant with her 3rd kid, because she would take care of my kids and her kids at the same time, her water broke way early. So I'm like answering the phone in my hotel, and she's like, my water broke, but I think I'll be okay. And I'm like, no, dude, you are not okay. You go to the hospital. And I'm like calling neighbors, like, come take care of the kids. I mean, it was just so, I did all that, but I don't do it now. So now you don't see it on my social media, because who knows if I'd have even put it out there then, but yeah, so I did it, but I don't have to do it now. Although, as you can see, I don't even have time to clean my office.
But I mean, it was
not, maybe I don't want
to get to know you in that way, and to see the kids, and to see, just to see the things that you did choose to share, because it's almost like, okay, well, yeah, she's kind of like us, or, I have that in common, or, you know what I mean? Because a lot of times when a person is an editor, at least from where I sit, and from what my students have said to me, they seem so unapproachable, right? This godlike figure, almost like this person is responsible, or may not my work, and if they do that, then I might, so you have that element, and then just to be seen as a regular everyday person, which we all are, I think is helpful.
Well, what editors are usually thinking, especially at publications, basically, the editor who can take your work is afraid of their editor. So kind of a message you are trying to convey to that editor is, if you hire me to do this thing, I will do it well enough that you will not get in any trouble with your higher ups. I know that sounds a little goofy, but it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
One of the reasons editors don't want to take a chance on a new writer is that you might screw up. And if you screw up, then that's on them from their editor's perspective. So to establish yourself in some way, as someone who's not going to go anywhere, who's going to meet the deadline, who's going to do what they ask, and who, if their editor, and honestly, that's what happened. Their editor, I just had this happen. I wrote a piece for Country Living, and the editor was like, well, my editor wants X that's a little bit different, and I'm fine. I get it. That I've had editors, that happens. So I'm sure I can change it. It's no big deal. Yeah. So your editor is only trying to protect their job.
But
and book editors are the same way. It's like,
I'm glad you said that though. I'm glad you said that, KJ, because I don't think that, people are really thinking about that. I think if you think that someone has the power to say yes or no to you, you're not really thinking about anybody over them. You know what I mean? But I love that you said that, because I mean, even when we work for ourselves, essentially, we still kind of have a boss.
Well, when I first started at the Times and was editing Motherlode, my co-podcaster and friend, Jess, who is now the author of that mega best-selling parenting book, The Gift of Failure, schools pay her tens of thousands of dollars to come and talk to them. At the time, she was an almost completely unpublished writer, and she wanted to write about, she was a teacher. So she wanted to write about what interactions between parents and teachers, and sort of like what it's like to be on both sides of those, to be the teacher in the room with the parent, but it also to sometimes be the parent. And that sounded good to me, and it fit with what I was writing, but she's also my friend. In fact, she was my kid's teacher at the time. And she's an untried, she hasn't published anywhere like this before. And I'm fairly new at the Times. And I was just like, I was scared to hire her because, if she screwed up, that was going to make me look bad. And because she hadn't written anywhere before, really was like, if I could be like, well, I'm sorry, she screwed up, but look, she used to write for, the Wall Street Journal, that would have protected me, but I didn't have that. So it was a real leap to let her write those first pieces. It was hard for me, and it was hard for her, because she knew unlike other writers, I talked to her about it. But here she far exceeded me in her career as a parenting writer by the end of that. By the time you worked with me, I was more able to see who I could take a chance on, and I felt more comfortable taking chances. But Jess was at the very beginning, and it was hard. How
does that affect your friendship? If that's just kind of interesting, right? It
was a little bizarre at the beginning, and there were definitely some moments. I don't know. I remember her giving me something that was I needed probably 800 words, and I remember her giving me something that was 1,400 and saying, "Well, you can cut this." It was just like, I'm not doing that even once. So I was just like, I literally sent it back to her, and I was like, better than this, cut it yourself. And I don't know. And there have been other writers who were maybe a little harder. Sometimes as an editor, you work with a writer who's scary for you to work with, right? like who am I to edit this person? And there was one person like that she would give me 2,000 words, and I needed 800, and I would just be like, oh my God, but I can't give this to the copy editors. Their heads will blow off. What am I going to do? It was really hard. But she wasn't a friend, so I was less able to say it than I was with Jess. I would just be like, better, seriously, I will. And then by the time we worked together, I had been there for a couple of years, and I was pretty comfortable. And it was much easier for me to both ask for writers for what I wanted, and also tell my editor, no, this is, we're going to do this. We're going to do this, even though, even though it seems a little bit risky, because then by then I had proven myself a little more.
But I guess I would have thought, because I was, and this is kind of when I thought I know that you might be working remotely, because I think your response to me after like maybe 2 months was like at 2 o'clock in the morning. And and it was like taking 1,500 words, making it like 750. So the first thing is, well, yes, you're like the New York Times, whatever you say, I'm going to do it. Like if you tell me to write a prescription, I'm going to do it. Whatever you say, I'm going to do it. But then how am I going to take this, what I'm trying to say that has taken me 15 words, that I whittled down to 15 words?
It's hard. Writing short is hard. Different topic, but
it really is. But I guess I just always thought that because people were coming to you really humble and hopeful, that there would never be any pushback, right, from what they may or may not want to do with their work, or that you'd have to kind of, that's kind of where I was coming from, or that's what it's
which
like.
is good. That's where we as writers should come from. And I hope I was at least helpful in cutting it down. But yeah, I would work with writers, because sometimes I would reach out to a writer who is more famous. Jennifer Weiner is a good example, although she was great to work with. She is not someone, but sometimes I would reach out to someone, because we were always trying to get more readers. That was our focus. And so I would reach out to someone famous and ask them to write something, and then to have to edit that, because they wouldn't necessarily always give me something that worked. And my job was to translate it into something that, that what I got didn't matter to my editors. They only saw what I gave them, and it had to, it had to fit a certain, mold, which got much looser over time. I mean, I went from having a copy editor remove the word poop from a sentence I had written about reindeer poop. I forget. I think he made me say reindeer excrement.
Oh, wow.
Or something stupid like that. Because at that point, I don't know, I was probably still getting hazed a little bit. It's just, anyway. And then, I don't know, 3 years later, I published somebody's article about her son who ran a vibrator company. And that was, that's a little different.
Right.
Yeah.
What's wrong with
so I got a lot more freedom as I was there, but.
Right. No. And I mean, yeah, I mean, I can see how that can happen. And even like you mentioned, reaching out to a celebrity and having them write something. I know, at least for me, having a relationship with any editor where an editor is coming to you is like,
that's the best, isn't it?
You know what I mean? And I've spoken to that a couple of times. Like even now I work with an editor at Parents, and every so often she'll just, hey, Sharisse, can you, or like you said, absolutely. What do you, it's a dream, because
I love being asked to write things still. And it hardly ever happens.
But it's such a blessing when it does, because the majority of the time, I mean, I got like 2 or 3 rejections last week. I mean, it's just the business, like you're always pitching, at least, always trying to sell your ideas and always hope someone will take you on. But this has just been, I just think this has been so lovely. And like I said, you've answered so many questions that I didn't ask, but you answered them. So I think the students are just going to get so much from this, KJ.
Great.
And I mean, I really, really appreciate the time, I just love you. I just love it.
Thank you. Well, and I just want to say, I mean, I get it. I think I probably don't look like a lot of your students, but I think that I come from something that is maybe closer to their experience. I mean, I went to Kansas State University, and at the time, sometimes I wanted to have a big sign that was like, hello, I'm out here too, because everybody else had gone to an Ivy League school. It's hard to come in to something that looks like everybody else has been there forever, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does.
I did learn that everybody felt that way. So there was that. And also that you just, people surprise you. You kind of think, oh, everybody else knows what's going on. Everybody else has been here forever. Everybody else is, everybody else grew up eating this raw fish on rice that you have just handed me, and I don't have any idea what to do with. And that has totally happened to me. So I don't know. It's you can get there, I guess.
No, you're right. No, but I'm actually glad that you said that, because I know in the piece that I wrote for you, or that you published for me, I was speaking to that kind of being other, or being different, or here I am at the new school, but yet I'm kind of broke, and I have kids that, I don't look like or feel like any of the people that I'm sitting next to. So, I mean, definitely speaking to that. And I think you just saying that and bringing that back up, I mean, that's a really important important point. It doesn't necessarily matter what you look like. I mean, all of us have been in that space, I think, right? Where we feel like someone else knows better, or they know more, or they have more experience, or whatever.
And you're afraid to ask because it doesn't
Yes.
seem like anyone else would have that question. And, you know, it's just always better to ask and figure out and get things right. And also, it's just because I said the word ask, like we talked at the very beginning of this about how if you don't write the book, it doesn't make any lists. If you don't write the article, you can't submit it. If you don't ask for the job, if you don't, you know, if you don't apply, if you don't ask the person, you know, hey, would you be interested in taking on an intern? Hey, have you ever thought about having a research assistant? You know, if you don't ask, you don't get.
That's true.
And I think a lot of people are afraid to ask. And so, but most of the time, people in my position, and now I'm, you know, grown up, and I most of the time they're happy to be asked. They're happy to answer.
I think the key is, I think the key is to not be afraid of no. I mean, I know for me to always be afraid of no, but I think having an autistic child, you know, in some ways it just taught me so much. It was like no is out the window, being embarrassed is out the window, like, you know what I mean? And so so it's kind of a blessing in that way. But yeah, I think always asking, not being afraid of no. And if you're told no once, that doesn't mean you're going to be told no. To keep asking.
You're gonna be told no.
You're gonna
be told no 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, 9,999 times out of 10,000. But if you don't ask, no one will ever say yes. No one ever comes and says, you know, Sharisse, I've been thinking you should teach a class.
Right.
That's not how this happened, I'll bet you. That's not how anything happens.
You know what? That is perfect, though. I love that you said that. And I think that's probably the perfect message to end on, because you absolutely have to ask. How else will you know, right?
Yeah.
How else will you know? Well, thank you so much, KJ. Let me tell you what normally happens after the interviews. The students want to know your social media. You know, they want to you and all that kind of
There's
stuff.
my Instagram.
I love that that's there. But so, I mean, I'm pretty sure you'll have a couple of students, you know, from my class or whatnot, that will start following you, maybe.
Oh, that's very nice.
But they're really a good group of students, and I'm going to continue teaching this class. I really love teaching this class. I'm actually adding a few more classes.
Oh, great. Congratulations.
So I'm really,
that's awesome.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm really, really having a good time with it, but I really enjoyed this time. I really appreciate you, everything you've done for me personally, just all of that. I just think you are a complete joy.
Thank you.
I really do. So thank you so much.